this conversation, Eliza, a GP and international board certified lactation consultant, discusses her expertise in neuroprotective developmental care, which is an evidence-based practice of working with the biology of our children to understand the ways in which we can support our family. She emphasises the importance of an individualised approach, understanding infant sleep needs, and the significance of co-regulation in parenting. The discussion also addresses common misconceptions about sleep training and the need for flexibility in parenting. In this conversation, we discuss the complexities of baby sleep, addressing common concerns such as early waking, the witching hour, and the challenges of managing sleep with multiple children. Eliza is the founder of a perinatal GP clinic in Sydney's Inner West, and along with her team offers comprehensive and personalised care for perinatal women, babies, which includes lactation and sleep support that focus on the possums approach. There is a wealth of knowledge, expertise, and also empathy from Dr. Eliza, and I recommend that you pass this episode on to as many parents as you can, as it offers ways in which we can take the guesswork out of supporting our child's needs, but also encourages reassurance for parents in their very undervalued backstage labour of raising our little humans. Enjoy. Hi Eliza, welcome to the podcast. I really appreciate your time because I know how busy you are.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Thanks. So maybe we could start with you giving us a little intro of yourself. So, where you're based, I know you're a mama and the work that you do.
Sure. So by sort of background and training, I'm a GP and I'm also an international board certified lactation consultant, so IBCLC. And obviously the focus of what we're going to be talking about today, I also did training with what was then the Possums Institute, so for Neuroprotective Developmental Care with Dr. Pamela Douglas. And so sort of with all of those kind of training qualifications, I started a perinatal GP clinic in Sydney's Inner West, where we support new families and also sort of do women's health and infant health. And as you said, I'm also a mum of three. I've got an almost 9-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a just turned 3-year-old. And they, like so many of us working in this area, were sort of a large part of the inspiration for me ending up here. And they continue to inspire and humble me and, provide a lot of inspiration for the work that I do.
Amazing. Yeah, so beautiful. As I said, you are a very busy lady and mama, so I don't know how you do it all. But let's just break it down a little bit for me, because I know you mentioned a few different modalities and credentials that you have. So what is the neuroprotective
developmental care?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
It's a training program for health professionals primarily with, I believe it's still now known as the NDC Institute for that training, but it has also been known by the name Possums, and I sort of still see that name being used, and that's the one that a lot of families are familiar with. And it's been founded by Dr. Pamela Douglas, who is a GP and an IBCLC herself, and she's sort of devoted her whole professional lifetime to supportive families and done a lot of research. And so she sort of has this framework that we use both for training but also when supporting families that relates to infant feeding and to sleep, and also a little bit to sort of their general development and unsettledness. And so the name Neuroprotective Developmental Care, as it suggests, like the whole aim of this sort of philosophy and approach is to protect a baby's optimal development, brain development, emotional development. It's very much founded in the sort of attachment parenting principles, so a focus on cued care and responsive care. But also I think there's not like one way to do possums. Maybe we'll come to this, but one of the most important parts of it is how much it is acknowledging that babies have their own unique temperaments and sleep needs and needs generally. And also that families have their own kind of value systems and support systems. So I guess it's about cued care that both acknowledges and responds to a baby's unique needs and how that fits in with the parent's value system. and it's, I guess, one of the kind of really lovely philosophies is, as I said, that flexibility, that individual nature of it. It's a lot about experimentation, and kind of finding a groove that works for your family. When it comes to sort of sleep specifically, it's based on an understanding of biologically normal infant sleep. So sort of, I guess, not sleep training, not this idea that you can or you need to teach your baby to sleep, but working within what's sort of a normal expectation for young human babies. And the other really big thing that Dr. Douglas focuses on is a baby's sort of need for a rich sensory environment. So she puts a lot of focus that there's sort of this, we talk a lot about sleep and feeding when it comes to babies and their development, but there's sort of this third sphere that we need to really be thinking about, and that's their sensory needs, and acknowledging that that's really important for a baby's brain to develop and thrive, is to meet those sort of rich sensory needs.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. I think, today we live in such a information overload society, don't we? So families have access to so much information.
Yeah, and so much conflicting information. So I will totally acknowledge how hard it is for families, and I've been there, to navigate how to best support their baby's sleep and development and feeding when there's so much actually quite conflicting information out there, even coming, from health professionals.
Yeah, absolutely. And, ultimately that's going to leave a family feeling quite confused and overwhelmed, which is totally understandable. And coming in, I think sometimes we come into, having this baby with quite preconceived ideas about baby's needs
Yep,
and
and how
what
it's
we
going to
can,
look, and
how it's going to
exactly what
look.
kind of parent you're going to be. I definitely had very strong ideas about how my children would be and how I would parent before I had kids. And as I said right at the start, they've just humbled me every step of the way.
I think they continue to do that throughout their lifetime, if I could say. Yeah, but so what makes this program different then from other sleep training or the other information that, families are going to get? What's the point of difference?
Yeah. So again, I will acknowledge that it's a divisive issue and that there's mixed information. But for families who are sort of interested in an alternative approach to sleep that's not sleep training, I guess that's one thing. So ultimately, you kind of have two different ways you can think about sleep. So a lot of the basis or premise for sleep training, the idea is that you can and you need to teach your baby to sleep, that it's a learnt skill. And again, I fully acknowledge that there are health professionals who still sort of follow this philosophy, this way of thinking about sleep. But alternatively, possums, and there are other alternatives to sleep training that follow a similar kind of philosophy. The suggestion or the argument is that sleep isn't a learned skill or a developmental stage. It's just a biological need. We need, food and water. We need warmth. We need love. We need touch. But we just need sleep, essentially. And that is regulated by a circadian rhythm, by the sun, essentially, and by sleep pressure or tiredness. And so I guess, we focus on those things about how do we optimize our baby's kind of biological sleep regulators. And that's the focus of sleep, rather than trying to teach the baby to sleep. I guess the other way that possums differs from, maybe more of a traditional sleep training approach to sleep is it just acknowledges how sort of the normal variation in temperament and sleep needs. So for anyone who's had, in particular, more than one child, can attest to how much, often sleep is just easier or trickier from birth, and a lot of that comes down to temperament rather than parenting style or even philosophy of sleep. And so some babies from birth are sort of a lot more sort of calm and chilled and will get themselves off to sleep relatively easily, and some are more sensitive and need extra co-regulation and touch, and those parents haven't sort of caused their baby to be that way. It's just the way they are. And the other, I guess, thing that we see that varies a lot between babies just inherently, naturally, is how much sleep they need in total. So, one of my criticisms of those more traditional sleep training approaches to sleep is it will tell you, at this age, your baby needs to sleep at X time and be awake for this time. And it doesn't acknowledge what we know, quite factually, that there is a very normal range in sleep needs. Some newborns might need as little as 9 or 10 hours sleep in 24 hours. Some might need up to 16 or even 18, and everything in between is normal. And so possums and some other, similar programs sort of acknowledge and work within variations both in temperament but also in sleep needs, rather than providing a really like one-size-fits-all schedule or something like that. And then, as I mentioned, I guess what makes possums different is sort of a basis in an understanding of biologically normal infant sleep. So what I mean by that is it's normal for babies to need help falling asleep, and some for a lot longer than others, like in terms of later in their life. It's normal for newborns in particular, but even older babies, to want to sleep on or close to a parent. So, like contact napping in those first few months of life in particular would be just how humans are hardwired, and that's okay and not something you need to kind of fix or solve. And as I said, many babies continue to sleep best in arm's reach of a parent into early childhood and sometimes even beyond, and that's okay. So I guess the focus is, rather than trying to fix that, it's about finding workable solutions for the family so that everyone can get the best possible sleep within that context. And we also would normalise babies waking overnight and needing help falling back asleep, again, like well into toddlerhood. So the whole program, I guess, sometimes it's harder. Parents might come with an expectation, often from what they've read or heard, that their goal would be for the baby to sleep through the night, and sometimes it's actually just about shifting and reframing those goalposts to, helping to optimize those sleep regulators, minimize night waking, but also just for the nights to feel as manageable as possible for the whole family, basically.
I love that. Yeah, and I love that you've made it feel like it's a very individual approach to each family.
Yeah, it
And
is. Yeah.
I can definitely relate to having the two children with completely opposite sleep needs. And of course, the one with the least sleep needs was my first baby, which somehow often is. And there's a lot of expectation that maybe it's something you're doing wrong. Maybe it's because you're not relaxed. Maybe because you're spoiling him, or
You haven't taught them how to self-settle is
you
often the
haven't taught
suggestion.
them.
You've somehow failed.
Somehow failed, and I think it's really very it's sad, and it's also very upsetting for a parent to think that they're doing something wrong. So very important to make mention that there are varying sleep needs, and
Yeah.
not all babies have to sleep for the same amount of time and for the same amount of hours within a 24-hour period.
I mean, and often the concern from parents, comes from this concern that, are they not going to grow or develop or thrive if they're not getting enough sleep, in inverted commas? And really, I guess, to reassure parents that there's no evidence that babies who sort of inherently need less sleep are in any way harmed, sort of developmentally or physically. And of course, as I said, there are some babies who need sleep and just need a lot of help with sleep. But for those babies who are seemingly happy and healthy and growing and thriving, but albeit having less sleep than what their guideline might suggest, that's okay, and it's not necessary for them to have more sleep in order to grow or develop or thrive.
Yeah, amazing. That takes so much pressure off.
I think that was when I found possums. It was as a parent, and I think the biggest sort of feeling I had when I read Pamela Douglas's book, The Discontented Little Baby, was a feeling relieved that I sort of didn't have to keep worrying about what I was doing wrong, why my baby was needing less sleep than what they were supposedly meant to.
Definitely, yeah. So I guess, understanding the baby's biology and their sleep regulators is important for parents to then be able to reason why they're doing what they're doing. How can they maybe simply tell well-meaning family and friends why they're allowing their baby to direct their sleep to some extent?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's hard, as you say, like it often comes from a well-meaning place, and there has been a really big shift kind of generationally in how we think about sleep, and this, neuroprotective developmental care and possums, and a newer sort of way of thinking about sleep is relatively recent. And so usually for sort of grandparents or other relatives, it comes from a place of love and concern, but I guess it sort of will depend a lot on your relationship with that family member. But it might just be that, like, oh look, we we as a couple or parents, or as a parent, like we've, read this information, it's evidence-based. I often say, would your relative be open to, say, reading Dr. Pamela Douglas's book? It's very evidence-based, and a lot of people read it and it just is common sense stuff that really resonates with them. So that might be one way. You're just kind of directing them to resources and research and evidence might be approach, or otherwise it might just be kind of explaining, look, we're going to do things a little bit different, and sort of just explaining, why.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much. That's really helpful. So if, as a GP, how are you able to weave some of these approaches, possums care and things like that, into your work with families?
Yeah, look, I would say it's often weaves into almost every consult I do relating to infants in one way or another. So I said I actually came across, or sort of found, possums first as a parent, and then the approach really resonated with me as a parent, but also as a health professional who kind of values evidence, and then sort of did my further training in this. And I guess what drew it to me, and the principles that I use just every single day, are an emphasis on cued and responsive care. So very much responding to your individual baby and following them and as a guide. As I said, the evidence base I would use every single day when I'm talking to families about what's normal in terms of sleep. I really like the fact that it is so individualised, as I said. So I'm never kind of suggesting or promoting a specific schedule when it comes to feeding or sleep, but really tailoring it to that baby's specific temperament and feeding and sleep needs. Just like we as adults vary in the amount of sleep and the way we like to sleep, and vary in how we even eat. Some adults like to kind of have small regular snacks. Some adults like to just have one or two big meals a day. Our babies can be the same. They can have their own unique needs. And so I very much follow that philosophy when I'm supporting families in how to best care for their baby. And as I mentioned earlier, I guess there's also a really strong emphasis on kind of values-based care, and sort of understanding a family's bigger context and their individual values and their support system and their goals. And so I guess tailoring advice and a management plan to that specific family. And as I also love the emphasis on kind of flexibility and experimentation. And so these are the kinds of things that I'm sort of using as part of our consults and management plan every day, almost every consult, I would say, whether it's about a baby or not, but in particular when it comes to, care of babies.
I love that. Yeah. Such a valuable resource that you give to families. I wish that we could actually just clone your clinic and your team and put it everywhere in the world, because it's so amazing. I wish I had your help when I had little ones.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there are like an increasing kind of movement of perinatal GPs and possums accredited practitioners.
Yeah.
But yes, obviously, I would love for us to grow and to be able to support more and more families. But if families, sort of this general philosophy appeals to them, you can go onto the NDC Institute website and find an NDC accredited practitioner as a start point. And there may be there's a few of us like scattered all around Australia.
Yeah, okay, good to know. All right, so I think perhaps at this point in the conversation we should go to the Q&As, because there's a lot of things that probably yourself and myself hear repetitively from families, their concerns and questions, and it would just tie in nicely with what we've been talking about already anyway.
Sure.
Yeah. So the first one I think I hear the most is about wanting to get babies into routine. So that word routine gets thrown around pretty early, doesn't it?
It does.
When can you get your baby into a routine, if there is such a time?
Yeah, I mean, I would suggest it really depends on the baby. I totally understand the appeal of having some structure and predictability to the day. I guess like just professionally, my whole day is scheduled and booked into appointments, and I guess that appeals to my personality. So I very much understand it. But I guess having my own children and working with other families, I've realized more and more that actually we don't get to pick, and it's very much depends on our babies. So there would be some babies who sort of fall into a somewhat consistent and predictable pattern of sleep and feeds from even as early as 1 or 2 months old, like once their circadian rhythm starts to regulate. And there are other babies who have a relatively inconsistent sleep and feeding kind of pattern well into toddlerhood. Again, acknowledging there are also some adults who really need and thrive on structure and predictability, and others who the opposite, really like the option of flexibility, and they might go to bed later a few nights in a row and then get to bed earlier and catch up. I guess so. So I guess there's not a single time. There are a lot of babies just will fall into more of a pattern when they drop to 2 or even 1 nap, where there's just a little bit of predictability about sort of when naps might happen, and feeds will sort of fit in around that, I would say. But I said there are others where really it might be years until there's sort of consistency or predictability. I guess I would suggest that the routine is sort of more beneficial to us as parents and caregivers. Like, it's not necessary for a baby. Certainly said there are babies who sort of like consistency in the way that they're responded to. They like to have a little pre-nap routine, or they like to eat in a certain place or feed in a certain chair. And some, for some parents that works really well, but it's not usually necessary. And as long as we are sort of responding to and following our baby's cues, or giving it our best shot, I think I really need to acknowledge you don't have to get it right every single time. That's kind of all they need in terms of consistency. They don't know what time it is. They don't need to know that they're going to nap at exactly the right time. And so I guess like so much of parenthood, right from conception through birth, through postpartum and having a child, is sort of an acknowledgement of like a letting go of control and of wanting to kind of fit things into a nice little schedule, and just kind of responding to and getting to know your baby and their needs.
Yeah, it's, very true words, but sometimes hard to swallow, I think, because
Totally get
acknowledging
it.
that we're in a modern society, and that's,
Yeah.
I think that can be half of it, is because we are so used to being scheduled, and
Absolutely.
that
And often, you might have two parents who are working, you might have
that's it.
daycare, you might have, times when there is an expectation that a baby will have sort of a predictable pattern. But I guess I would just normalize that lots don't. And so a lot of parents worry like, oh, they're starting daycare and they don't have a real nap schedule or whatever. And I'd kind of say, actually, that's okay. They might fall into one at daycare, they might not. It's so normal that daycare educators like really should be able to work with a degree of flexibility if that's the way your baby is.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think it's just from what I've seen in working with families, it's kind of an unlearning, isn't it? It's
Mm,
kind of a stepping back.
mm,
And what I've noticed is there's a lot of families that come in with sayings to me straight away as a postpartum doula. What I would like you to help me with is to get my child into a routine as quickly as
mm,
possible. And I'm like,
mm,
okay, well, let's talk about that. I
mm.
sort of ease into it. And then as they move along and as the baby gets a little bit bigger and they start to learn a lot more about their baby, it's kind of just backpedaling and saying, okay, maybe that's not really the way it's going to work. Maybe they're not going to fit into the routine we think they were going to. And
Yep,
it's just
I agree.
super
Unlearning's a
relaxing.
great way of thinking about it. Yeah.
It's an unlearning that everything in life has to be scheduled. Everything in life has to
Mm,
be, because I think as well, our society tells us we can have
mm,
it all. So our baby's
yeah,
just going to fit into our life. But
absolutely. Yep.
babies are born as whole human beings, as we know. And so
Yeah, with their own
they're
unique
bred
needs and,
differently,
as you say, temperaments, personalities.
for
Absolutely. And I
sure.
think it always comes from a place of love as well, and concern that it might be important or necessary for a baby. And so it's really not for them. It's like definitely nice for us as parents, but babies are okay without, a strict schedule.
Yeah. And what I do see though is once, particularly mothers, because they're usually the ones that are staying home with the child, once they start to let go of some of those expectations and
Mm,
realize, actually, I'm going to let the baby, lead me in some ways.
mm,
There's a relaxing, and there's the pressure goes away, and the burden goes away of feeling, so determined to get this baby into a routine.
And it can
Um,
be just more enjoyable to
and it's more
just,
enjoyable.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's more enjoyable for, I think, more the mother than the baby, really.
Yep,
But,
yep.
yeah, let some of these things go. So next question is about holding your baby to sleep. At what point should you stop doing that, because you don't want your baby to become dependent on you to be able to get to sleep? I know
Yep.
we touched on this, but we'll go over it again.
That's okay. Yeah. So
Mhm.
again, I would say, for as long as it's working for you and your baby, your child, that's okay. It's I would just normalize it. So again, if we can kind of move on from the idea of sleep being a skill, or
Mm.
something you need to train your baby to do, then it's a lot easier to kind of sit with the idea that your baby will eventually be able to fall asleep independently when they're ready. So it's really normal for young babies to need help to fall asleep, despite the fact that they do need a reasonable amount of sleep. And for some children, that extends right into toddlerhood as well. But I think what I really love is the idea that actually it's co-regulation. It's helping our
Mm.
babies. It's holding them. It's cuddling them. It's feeding them. That lays down those kind of building blocks for them to be able to self-regulate when they're ready. So not only is it not a problem, I would argue it's actually
Mm.
beneficial for our babies' brains and nervous systems to be held and touched and supported to sleep, and at other times as well, for as long as it's kind of necessary and working for everyone. And I guess, like, I know we're not specifically talking about co-sleeping, but I love that there's good evidence that children who have co-slept actually show, independence and improve self-confidence when they're older. And I'm not, like, I know co-sleeping is not for everyone. I know not all children want or need to co-sleep, and not all parents can make that work for their family. But I guess to unpick that idea that you might breed dependence, or you might be causing problems by kind of holding and touching and cuddling, sleeping close to your baby, the evidence actually tells us the opposite, that it in fact teaches them self-regulation and self-confidence and autonomy.
Yeah, what an important point to know, because it is the opposite thinking that we often get from past generations and things like that.
Yep.
So, but I mean, it makes sense. As adults, we all co-regulate.
Yeah.
We like to
Yeah.
cuddle to feel secure. We like to be close to somebody, and so I think it just makes sense that why wouldn't a little person need to that as well?
Absolutely. I
We need
often say
that
that
as
to
adults.
families when I'm feeling
Yeah,
extremely dysregulated. I like to talk about it. I like a cuddle. I like a cup of tea or a bath. Like, these are all co-regulation tools. And so absolutely we can't expect our tiny baby to be able to self-regulate when they're feeling dysregulated if we as adults are still, often learning that ourselves.
definitely. Yeah. And would you say babies and children can be manipulative?
I mean, I would say toddlers and older kids. It's certainly are trying to understand boundaries and autonomy. But when we're talking about little babies and we're talking about sleep, then no, I wouldn't say that. I think they're just communicating their needs, and as I said, it's just okay, and it's not harmful to meet our babies' emotional needs and to support them with sleep. And that's not manipulation.
Yeah.
I have
Thank
a
you.
3-year-old, so as you say that, I'm like, there's definitely, that's, she's obviously trying to understand where boundaries are, and what autonomy she has, but that's a very different situation. And I, like, even her, I lie next to her every night as she falls asleep, and she potters into our room at some point and sleeps for, some part of the night on most nights. And so I see that as a very different situation than other areas where we might need to set some loving boundaries.
Sure. Oh, it's so good that you're living this experience as well. It just makes you so much more relatable and down to earth.
And I do get it. And I've had, 3 kids with relatively low sleep needs, in particular my 2 younger ones, and 1 or 2 kids with very sensitive temperaments. So I do understand. Yeah.
Yes. Yep. Okay. So, what would you say if, because a mother is not getting a lot of sleep, it's
Mm,
having a big impact on her mental health, and you're seeing a downturn there
yeah.
in her ability to cope? What would you suggest
Yeah.
for that mother?
I would, like, whilst I've talked about all these normal things, if sleep is feeling unmanageable and if it's impacting on a mother or parent's mental health, then of course it is appropriate to get some support with your baby's sleep. So, I'd suggest finding a sleep consultant, whatever you want to call them, whose philosophy and approach aligns with your own values. And, I would suggest that is evidence-based as well. Because there are sometimes things we can do to optimize sleep regulators and to reduce night waking or to help sleep to feel more manageable. So I guess to overall summarize, if it's feeling unmanageable, if it's impacting your mental health, it's okay to get help and just try and find someone whose approach resonates with you and works for your family and your baby. And as I said, sometimes it is about working with someone to optimize those sleep regulators as much as possible, but then also, as I said, like reframing or shifting the goalposts. I guess if part of the impact on your mental health is this expectation that your baby should be sleeping through, then, that feeling of like failure or concern is not going to help with your mental health. So if the goalpost instead is for nights to feel as manageable as possible and for mums or parents to get as much sleep as possible, then sometimes it's actually about like mixing up the sleep arrangements. It might be about increasing supports. It might be about conversations if you have another parent involved about how you might share the load, rather than what we can do to make your baby sleep through the night. And I would also say that, of course there is a link. Postpartum depression and anxiety are really common. Of course, sleep deprivation can contribute to that. I would suggest that there's so many factors that contribute to it, but of course you should also just touch base with a perinatal GP and hopefully be linked in with a perinatal psychologist alongside getting support with sleep and general supports for you and for your family.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So we don't want mums suffering in any way.
No.
If at any point they are not feeling like they're,
Exactly. If it's not feeling okay, get some help. And some of
Yeah.
it might be shifting goalposts and reframing and coming up with just really practical supports around sleep. And some of it might be, like, often it's a bit of fine tuning around naps and bedtime and sleeping arrangements that can help to optimize your baby's sleep regulators. And then, of course, I said, linking in with a sort of specifically perinatal trained psychologist can be really helpful as part of the puzzle as well.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so why do babies often wake at 5 a.m.?
I would say a lot of babies are just naturally early birds. Like, that's just kind of how their body clock is. It's like, I guess everyone sort of knows the idea that kids often wake up early. So for some kids, that's just their body clock. I also would suggest that in sort of white Western culture, we often babies are being put to bed earlier, and so therefore they wake up earlier, and that's kind of just the way it is. And if that works for your family, that's fine. It's not inherently problematic. If this early waking isn't because it's their body clock and they're not seeming like they're rested, sometimes they're just in a lighter sleep by 5 a.m., by the early hours of the morning, and they want to kind of sleep close or to have extra help falling back asleep and staying asleep. So lots of families who aren't otherwise co-sleeping, bub might end up in the bed at that kind of 5 a.m. mark, and everyone just gets back to sleep for a little bit longer. And again, if that works and can be done safely, sometimes that works well for some families. Some babies, I'd say, are probably getting cold, I guess, as the nights are getting cooler. So it might be that, at one of the wakes, you're adding an extra layer or popping on, like, I really like those gentle kind of oil heaters that just take the edge off the coldness but don't sort of dry out the air in the same way. But, whatever works for your family. But I guess from a sleep regulator point of view, as I said, if it's feeling problematic, the early start, then there might be some room for experimenting with the timing of naps and bedtime. So pushing back bedtime commonly might help push back awake time if it's feeling early. So I guess overall, I said your baby's sleep needs are part of them. You can't change that. And for babies, who have lower average sleep needs, you often can't get a sleep in, big long naps in the day and an early bedtime. There's just doesn't can't have all of it. So I guess it's kind of working out what feels really important for your family, but also what fits in with your baby's natural body clock as well. And so sometimes it might just be like, earlier bedtime works, early wake time's part of the deal, and it might be that parents are taking turns, or if it is, a mum overnight who's doing a lot of the resettling, that, is there capacity in that family for dad or for the other parent to be getting up at that 5 a.m. and hanging out or going for a walk or playing with the baby so mum can get a little bit of extra sleep then. there's no kind of single way, but long-winded way of saying there's a few different reasons why they can be waking at 5 a.m.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So really it's just a lot of experimentation, isn't it? So working with your child and also it can change. So
Yeah.
it's not as if one size fits all, and once they're going to bed at 7 p.m. at night time, they'll be waking up at 7 a.m. It's just kind of fiddling
Yeah,
around.
that's
And
so
so,
rare. Not many babies need 12 hours sleep or are on a 7 to 7 schedule. And yes, so it's absolutely understanding your baby, but also your family. So, some families I work with might have one parent who are up really early for work or home late from work, and actually giving them permission, not that they should need it, to go to bed later as a family so that they can enjoy some time together is fine. There is nothing wrong with a baby going to bed at 9 or 10 at night and waking up at 8 or 9 if that works for your family.
yeah, that's really good that you've said that, because I think that's another myth, is that it's kind of it's a no-go to put your child to bed beyond 8 p.m. or something. So
Yeah.
and that's okay.
It
You choose
absolutely
your
is. It's
bedtime.
very and it's very cultural. As I said, that's
Mm,
a sort of white Western phenomenon, the 7 o'clock
mm,
bedtime. And in a lot of the world, families all go to bed at the same time, might be on one big bed on the floor together,
mm,
or and so often in those cultures or countries or communities, they're children are napping for later, or till they're older, or have an extra drop a nap a little bit later, sort of to make that later bedtime work.
mm, mm. Good to know. Okay. Next question. What did I have? Oh, yes, when a toddler is around. So, this opens up a whole new range of challenges when a baby is born.
Welcoming a second baby, yeah, or
Welcoming a
subsequent
second
baby, yeah.
baby. What tips do you have about perhaps the bedtime? Maybe we could start with that. So, how to manage bedtime for both children.
Yeah, so obviously it will depend on the age of the child or children and the supports available at home. So if you do have two parents or two people at home, then, often it works for a period of time to kind of tag team or divide and conquer a little bit. And I guess I would normalize, as we've just said, for lots of babies, often in those first few months of life anyway, their bedtime is naturally a little bit later. So I'd again encourage you to experiment and to be flexible and to acknowledge that it will change. But in those first few months of having a newborn, it might, if you've got an extra parent around and if that baby is happy to go to the other parent, it might still be possible for mum to be doing the older child's toddler's bedtime for a period of time. And maybe the other parent or the other adults, so, taking the baby for a walk or having, bouncing with them or doing the bath or shower or whatever else.
Yeah.
Or sometimes, if some babies, and my youngest in particular, I was sort of stuck from 4 till 8 p.m. for a couple of months there, and I just literally couldn't move. She just wanted to feed or cry. And so, for us anyway, my husband, their dad, taking over the older kids' bedtime worked, and that's still kind of how we divided up even now, 3 years later. And I'd say if that's sort of likely to be where things are heading, then there can be some value in the other parent taking over the toddler or the older child's bedtime, even in pregnancy. So it sort of doesn't feel like, this very obvious stepping away of mum if mum's always done bedtime. But I guess for those where there maybe isn't someone else available, if it's just one parent, mum, doing bedtime, then, certainly I always found it helpful to maybe have the baby in a carrier or bouncer or be breastfeeding while I was sort of reading stories or doing the older kids' bedtime. Sometimes things like a audio book or music can be a great option. Podcast. We just listened to a great podcast on the way down yesterday. I can't remember what it was, but ABC Kids have some great podcasts, or might be, books for older kids, or even TV if that's something that, fits in on a unique kind of one-off. Not great to have screen time before bed, but I guess having something to entertain the older child while you put the baby to bed, if that's an option, or have the baby in with you and while you're doing bedtime. I guess some families might have things like side-by-side floor beds, big mattress on the floor. I guess acknowledging that having an older sibling in the bed is a contraindication to bed sharing with a young baby, but I guess that's where the side-by-side beds, something like that might fit in. And ultimately, if you are doing this solo and it's not feeling manageable, it might be about exploring what paid or unpaid family supports you might have available to you to come. So when I was in the thick of this stage with my youngest, and she was really colicky and unsettled, we did get a nanny one evening a week when my husband was home from work late, and so she would help with the bed and bath and dinner and those kind of things, just for that first couple of months until things settled down, and then I could more easily manage it myself. But it's a juggle, it's a mess, it feels chaotic. I guess sometimes it's just about survival and experimenting, as said, and knowing that it will pass, and you'll find a routine and a rhythm, I'm sure.
Absolutely. And I think just kind of letting go of the shoulds as well at this point, because,
absolutely.
things are going to get a bit chaotic, and maybe your toddler's bedtime and sleeping is going to become a little bit all over the place.
Yeah.
And cater to that, adapt to that. And it's okay. Like, we're doing the best we can.
Absolutely. And a lot, it's not uncommon that toddlers are starting to drop naps in the midst of having a new baby, and that's messy. And yes, absolutely. I think ultimately, if the toddler sometimes gets a bit tired or overtired on some nights, it's okay. I agree. Being kind to yourself, letting go of some control, and if you can kind of just get through it, as I said, well done.
Yeah, and maybe as hard as it seems, even having a bit of a sense of humour about it.
Yeah. Sometimes that's easier after the fact, isn't it? But yes.
After you can look back. So I know you weren't expecting this question, but I hear a lot of it. What is the witching hour? Is it an expression that we just use to make an excuse for that late afternoon?
Look, I'd say, certainly in young babies, it's a very well recognised phenomenon, and it can extend into toddlerhood and childhood. I often sort of explain to parents that, if you look back just from an evolutionary point of view, I wonder whether that behaviour is a kind of the sun is going down, reminding the parents, I'm here, keep me safe, bring me inside, don't forget me, don't pop me down, just from a pure survival kind of strategy. I also would normalise, for breastfed babies, a lot of breastfeeding mums' milk supply is lower kind of in the late afternoon, evening, and so I wonder whether some of that is just some extra stimulation for supply, but also as part of that, often that milk towards the end of the day, if the volume is lower, it's higher in fat and melatonin, all these beautiful components that support the baby's sleep. So if I would kind of say, lean into this witching hour and that cluster feeding, if that's what comes with it, trust that it's probably something important for your supply, but also for your baby to fill up with that beautiful fatty melatonin rich milk. And often the trade-off is that the nights do start to feel a little bit more manageable for a period of time. So you kind of might get this period where the afternoon and evenings and first part of the night are just a bit brutal. But often then there's a stretch of sleep where a baby's happier to be put down and to sleep independently, and then I kind of also say, get to bed as soon as you can after the witching hour. And so I guess very much in young babies, it's very normal, very reassuring actually in my mind if a baby's doing this sort of behaviour. And some kids, after 10, 11, 12, 13 weeks are very much growing out of that, and that is fine. But certainly there are older babies and toddlers who can still have a bit of a witching hour. And I guess, again, it comes down to understanding your baby's needs and temperament. There are some kids and babies who really need an energy outlet before bed. It's they just need to kind of get it all out of their system, and having rough play and wrestles or dancing or whatever works for your family is great to kind of help them to then get nice and tired and sleep well. And other babies actually, or children, older kids, toddlers, kind of need the opposite. They need a wind down. So again, experiment, but maybe having a nice long bath with some calming music, or some essential oils if your bub's skin isn't too sensitive, or playing an audio book, or sort of having some time in the dark for cuddles and to talk about the day can be helpful. So I think it's something we see well into toddler and childhood for some children, and it can be different for different kids in terms of the best way to support them getting off to sleep for a good night's sleep after that.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I would also argue that some of us, as adults, also have a bit of a witching hour. I mean,
yeah.
And some of the practical things that, I know I like to do is have dinners prepared in the morning, or already have something ready to go, because that's the time of the day you just feel exhausted. You
Yeah,
feel,
that's totally true. Absolutely.
yeah,
I get to a point most nights, I'm like, can we do this? Can we get through dinner and bedtime and
next few hours, yeah.
that couple of hours? Exactly. So pre-made meals, all things for your own nervous system, playing calming music, getting out for a quick walk before dinner if that's possible for your family. You know, like avoiding caffeine after a certain time of day, really kind of obvious things, I agree, can help with our own witching hour nervous
Yeah.
systems.
Yeah, exactly. I think you've mentioned this before, but regarding a baby's sort of brain development, we worry a lot about that in terms of, whether they're getting enough sleep. But what
Mm,
about a baby that is a cat napper? Is that really
mm.
enough sleep for them to be able to do all the things that they're supposed to do internally?
For lots of them, it can be. I mean, I guess I would just point out that day sleep and night sleep have different sort of functions
Mm.
biologically. So, absolutely having that deep sleep overnight is what helps them to lay down memories and their brains to develop and growth and healing and all of those sorts of things. It's okay for them to wake every couple of hours and need help falling back asleep, but most babies, most humans need a period of good deep sleep overnight. But daytime sleep is actually just more about sleep pressure. So young babies often can't be awake for that long, kind of before they've built up enough sleep pressure that they need a nap. And so they often then only need a short nap to kind of take the edge off that sleep pressure to carry on. So the daytime is all about that sensory experience and, experiencing the world around them basically. And then nighttime for when that all gets consolidated into memories and development and healing, as I said, and all of those sorts of things. So catnapping is a really normal variation. It's not harmful. There's not a magic amount of sleep that a baby needs in the day, for example, in order to thrive. And a lot of them said only need a little nap because they've only been awake for a short amount of time. And then often as they get older, they can and they need to be awake for longer going into a nap. They build up more sleep pressure and then they kind of need a bit of a longer nap, and without you having to do anything.
Okay. Yeah, great to know. So babies will sleep, won't they? They'll get the
Yeah,
sleep
so
on
they
their head.
will. They need help falling asleep,
Yes.
and so I would normalize that. And I think sometimes some people have sort of read up on possums and maybe come away with this idea that if your baby's tired, they'll just fall asleep. So
Mhm.
that's not true for a lot of babies. They need help falling asleep, but it shouldn't
Okay.
take a really long time. And then we can also trust that if they've woken up after a short nap and they seem refreshed and happy and bright and chatty, and then they're fine. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so what is sleeping through the night? Is that the 12 hours, or what are we talking about?
There isn't one universal definition. There are some resources that suggest sleeping 5 hours without signalling is considered sleeping through the night. So actually, lots of babies are doing that from fairly early
Mm,
on some nights anyway. Um, and but I guess my definition of a good, healthy kind of sleep regulators would be a baby who falls asleep easily at the start of the night, whenever that is, maybe wakes even as often as every couple of hours overnight, but is quickly and easily falling back asleep with a little bit of help, and then wakes up in the morning when their body's in daytime mode and is falling more into naps at that point. So some might suggest that's sleeping through the night, but there would be others who sort of the expectation from the phrase is that the baby is sleeping in their own space for 10 or 12 hours without signaling to their parent. We know that all humans will wake through the night at the end of sleep cycles. We as adults do it too. So I guess, the sleep training industry, the emphasis on the fact that the baby's not signaling or needing help falling back asleep when they do wake overnight.
okay. Yeah, really good to share that information, because there's a lot of confusion about what that actually
Mm,
means.
mm.
When I had my children, I think my interpretation, maybe it was taught to me, was that if your baby was sleeping 5 or 6 hours straight, that would be a sleeping through the night.
Yeah, there are some definitions that suggest that, but I mean, it's not that practically helpful for some people because most, babies need to be in bed overnight for more than the 5 hours. But yes, I think, I guess conversely, what would be kind of excessive or considered outside of normal range or suggestive of disrupted sleep regulators is waking, hourly or more, or taking a long time to fall back asleep overnight.
Mm,
That rather than it being a specific time frame, that might suggest that there's some things that could be optimized in terms of sleep pressure or circadian regulation.
Yeah. Thank you. This has been a very enriching conversation about this ever elusive thing we call sleep that parents are always chasing. I would argue that you never fully have a full night's sleep ever again. I think it's debatable. But
Yeah.
you certainly can, eventually find our groove and get into a routine, and everyone feels rested in the morning.
Yeah, I think again, like there is that shift in the goalposts, and um, I would agree that like I don't think I have slept through the night myself really for almost 9 years, but at the moment, sleep feels perfectly fine with my daughter popping in at some point in the night, and it's amazing how you adapt and can survive. But I guess overall, like sleep it can feel so big and so stressful especially when you have your first baby, and when there are these unrealistic expectations, and there is something nice about like having other children or just time passing and realizing like it's okay, they all get there in the end, and it's not really something that you need to worry about teaching them. They will get there, and it's just about supporting you through that time.
Yes, definitely. And I think that's some nice points for families to take away from this conversation, is that, just be really kind to yourself. This
It's
is a
hard.
difficult time, and
Yeah.
every family is different circumstances, different sleep needs, different children's temperaments.
Yeah.
So we can't, it's not a good idea to compare ourselves with others. It's,
No.
really important to find what works for our family.
Exactly. And to know that if it's not feeling manageable, it's very unlikely something that you're doing wrong. And sometimes it is just trickier, and sometimes there are little things we can fine tune, but it's just not something you should feel like guilty or worried about if sleep is feeling tricky. Just seek help from someone who is a good fit for your family.
Yes, for sure. And I think we'll put all that information up in the show notes about possums and the NDC program, because it is so fascinating and maybe a very new concept for a lot of families in the way that we think about our children's needs.
Yeah.
And the way
And I
that
think
they're
a
made.
lot of parents, when they come across it the first time, it really resonates with them, and it's really refreshing and reassuring. So I hope that everyone can find that as well. And the book's the other thing I guess could link that might be a helpful start point. They've got some great free online resources, and then I said that find an NDC practitioner function on their website.
Yes, yeah. And if someone is Sydney based, how do they find you? And what sort of availability do you have? I know you have a whole team, so you get to
Yeah, so
get around.
my clinic is Nurtured Medical in Leichhardt, and we've also got a smaller clinic in the Northern Beaches in Avalon. We do telehealth, and for babies under 12 months, there's usually a Medicare rebate, or for pre-existing patients. But for those who would like some face-to-face support, so we're in Leichhardt, and you're right, I have less availability, but I've got a wonderful team that I work with. All of us are possums NDC trained, and a lot of our team are either current or training IBCLCs, and we all follow a very similar approach and philosophy. And they're an incredible team who I couldn't more highly recommend them. So for anyone needing support, one of us usually has availability kind of at relatively short notice.
Absolutely. I highly recommend your team, and I know that I've recommended them to many families and always been very satisfied with the results, and just with the personalised service, which is just beautiful. And as I said, it would be great if we could make many of you.
Trying that. We are growing.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah. So thank you so much again. I know, you're flat out, so I really, really do appreciate your time, and I know this information is going to be so valuable. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks again for having me.
I hope that you enjoyed this episode and that it offered something helpful to your own mothering experience. If you are a pregnant woman or know someone who is, head over to my website to receive your free copy of the postpartum checklist and contact list. And if you'd like to be better prepared for your postpartum, both practically and mentally, Purchase the Peaceful Postpartum ebook, a 52-page interactive guide on what you need to know and what matters most in postpartum. And so that we can get these conversations out to more mothers, I'd be grateful if you could like, share, and review this podcast, and we'll see you next time.